title of the workshop is Standards Ensures Resiliency. And the reason why, as India Internet Foundation, we submitted this workshop, the background of it is that there is an increasing level of IT penetration and networking in almost all areas of life which we see currently. It impacts us both economically as well as it has got a social potential impact. And if India wants to touch that $5 trillion industrialized vision, nation, the vision for India, then we cannot fail to act upon resiliency. Because increasing digital India also is giving new threats, which must be responded very quickly and very decisively. Uh, Specifically, the danger of having a targeted cyber attacks on IT infrastructures, which affects the public sector bodies or the operators of critical infrastructures or any other business and organizations to some degree based on what they are trying to do. This is going to be a subject which needs to be debated at the level of the board in organizations, that how do we make our organizations resilient, how do we make our systems resilient, and how do we make certain critical infrastructures which are fundamental like internet also resilient internet. Now, to have this discussion, we have Mr. Amitabh Singhal with us. He has wore a lot of hats. He was a director of Public Internet Registry. He was the man who initially was the first CEO of Nixie and founded this institution, National Internet Exchange of India, way back in 2004-5. So from him, we will.
Can't hear. Disruption.
Anupam, you are not audible, you are not visible.
Yeah. So is there a network issue there again?
I think. So while Anupam joins in, Amitabh sir, if you can just start, kind of put on your perspective.
Okay. Thank you. I was about to, and thank you, Anand. And yeah, I think I would first like to start off by thanking Anupam. He was just introducing me, and just to just make a technical correction, Nixie was founded in 2003, and it went into operation in 2004 with the first 4 internet exchanges in India, a critical element of the internet infrastructure nationally as well as globally. And then 2005, it started the .in CCTLD registry activity, and then after that it's all history. So I think given the this topic for today, let me, I'm not a technical guy, but from a policy and regulatory perspective, is what my outlook has been from. But to just to get everything in perspective on the topic, I think one of the things that we have to look back at from a historical perspective is one of the very foundational principles behind the invention of the internet itself was to develop a resilient communication network, right? Which would be safe from disruptions. That was the requirement of the Cold War, so to say. It was a military beginning, and the requirement was there for that. But then over 40 years down the line, internet has become the lifeline for humanity itself. 5 billion plus people are connected. 2/3 of the global population is connected to the internet, and their very lives depend on it. As we have also seen through the COVID times, the world carried on only because of internet. Now, this internet is basically an ever-growing vast ecosystem. It has various elements like internet backbones and transit links, fixed networks, fixed access networks, mobile and wireless access networks, satellite networks, optical fiber networks, submarine cables, internet exchanges, content delivery networks, the World Wide Web itself, where there's vast amount of content and data, etc., etc., and all the information, right? So this system binds the people and all sectors of the economy, any economy that you look at, nationally, globally, regionally, locally, be it finance, media, government, energy, healthcare, transportation, e-commerce, education networks, name it, everything's on the internet, right? But despite this vastness and ubiquity of the internet and keeps growing and still keeps evolving, the internet system has remained a decentralized, open, and a permissionless network of networks, which has worked well, right, all throughout. It has no central controlling, headquarters system, so to say. But the end of it all, it is still about a resilient internet connection service, which is an always-on connection, provides a certain speed, quality of service levels, service level agreements are inbuilt depending on the kind of service access that you use. And it has to be basically reliable against disruptions and is supposed to maintain uninterrupted access, right? So it is expected to be able to continue to operate even if the network is damaged somewhere or disrupted, and it should be able to make a rapid recovery if failure does occur in some part of the element of this network. And which is the reason why I was talking about all these different elements. Now, resiliency, when we look at, could be at any of these given elements and the periphery. Now, having said that, internet does remain vulnerable to threats and disruptions, which could be man-made. These are like various kinds of cyber attacks via ransomware. We have this big AIMS case recently, which was a ransomware attack, still trying to recover from it. Malware, denial of service, supply chain attacks, causing physical damages even during wars and other terrorist attacks or whatever, for a variety of motivations, of course. Or there are technical faults. There could be cable faults. There could be hardware and software failures. There could be satellite downtimes, etc., etc. So these are the vulnerabilities which threaten the continuous availability of service over the internet. And these threats and disruptions can be engineered by cyber criminals, or it can be engineered. They can be engineered by state-sponsored and non-state actors, right? Now, given this background, uh, we all know in the industry that there are mechanisms to keep a check on the state or the various elements and resiliency of the networks and the various elements of the networks. And there are some SSL standards and open protocols which keep the services on the internet relatively secure, safe, and trustworthy. There are technical standards such as IPsec, TLS, RPKI, DANE, TLS, DNSSEC, and there are community initiatives like Manrus and Kite DNS, etc. So, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, you guys are more technical and involved in the engineering part of it and the implementation part of it. Currently, there is no single and reliable system that tracks, measures, and provides ready information on whether these, various elements of the networks or the online marketplaces, the content sites, the social media sites on which the humanity depends, have deployed any kind of, open security standards and protocols, right? Which generate that resiliency in the various elements of the network. Now, hundreds of millions of internet users, and because this is India Internet Governance Forum, I'm talking about the internet user ecosystem. We are talking about something like 850 million plus internet users in India itself. It's a huge number. It depends on sharing of critical information. But do they have any way to check if they are relatively safe from any kind of disruptions to the resiliency of the network? Are they safe from cyber crimes such as phishing, hacking, spoofing? And we all know that India is among one of the 5 top economies to suffer from cyber crimes and different kind of disruptions. And this is based on the data which even FBI has. Okay. So is there any user-friendly system which can quickly and easily help check the state of the protection of the websites or the mail servers or the various elements of the network? So now various service providers who actually run some of these different elements of the network, from the big internet companies, big tech companies to the CDN operators and IXPs, do they have these standard system protocols and technologies? Do they deploy it? What extent do they deploy it? Okay, and if they have deployed it, is there information available whether those deployments are in place and how do they keep general users safe? Right now, that's something which is really, really essential. I think that's one missing piece in the system that I believe that we have to really, really work on. So
Okay.
that's to that extent, I would say that standards is I would say the foundation which holds the internet together and keeps helps to make it grow seamlessly as it is. And that's where we need to kind of, as you rightly said earlier, we need to discuss on how to ensure that we all have a very transparent system of standards adoption and implementation.
Sure,
That's what I feel.
sure, Amitabh. So this was really a good opening, welcome remarks, and the example of resiliency is what I can give you right now when I logged out from corporate network and had to use my phone network to log back in. So again, resiliency at its best. So the question which I will leave with you and come back to you after some time is when we talk about resiliency, is resiliency a defensive action? So while you think over it, I'll come back to you. But that is an answer which I'd like to get from you. That is it really a defensive action? So with this in the context of India Internet Governance Forum, I'll now move to Anand. So Anand, you have been working on some of the aspects of resiliency over last few years, and you have been trying to measure a lot of internet related statistics to understand that what are the points where resiliency is actually required. Can you share your experience with us and give us 2 3 pointers that where should as a nation we should work upon uh, on internet resiliency in particular, and then what are the standards we should look up to?
Sure. Thanks, Anupam, for getting this perspective, and Amitabh sir for the welcome remarks and kind of setting the context. Working on resiliency aspect of it, I would like to make this understand first, as Amitabh sir also was telling that it was resiliency by design when internet was invented, and because of that Cold War. Whenever we see internet, we see internet service providers at the bottom, which are providing internet services to us, and they are making physical infrastructure, working with the power infrastructure, and making resiliency into their core activities. If their network is not resilient, then definitely they will not kind of provide services to us. Now, that's the first entity, which is ISPs, which are providing internet access to us. Now, they are using IP addresses, and with those IP addresses, they actually route with other ISPs. So they actually do routing with other ISPs, and these IP addresses need to be resilient. These routing switches need to be resilient. They use RPKI and other protocols over there, which are resilient protocols. And these IPs are provided by IRRs, so Internet Routing Registries. These internet routing registries are also making their network, their infrastructure resilient in that sense. The same way, these ISPs are also using DNS. And DNS are having different aspects of it, whether it is a root zone resiliency, whether it is CCTMP resiliency, whether it is the recursive servers resiliency or the authoritative server resiliency. Each and every organization who is working on these aspects, whether it is root servers, they use Anycast as a protocol to make root zone resilient. The same way, recursive servers are using Anycast and other protocols for other standards to make those things resilient. Now, whenever we talk about websites and the content part of it, they are hosted in different data centers. Now, data centers had their own set of standards, which they make use to become more secure and resilient. On top of that, there are initiatives that have come up, like Amitabh sir was telling that mandate the mandate routing security, which says that all the ISPs, and content providers should mutually work together so that the routing infrastructure should be resilient and secure. The same way, for DNS also, there are lots of things that are coming. In that way, what happens over here is, whenever you see resiliency, there are lots of aspects to it, lots of components to it. And if we are talking about resiliency for a national perspective, there should be something which could measure these aspects, because one of the component, if it disturbs or it kind of become unsecure and it is not resilient, whether it is DNS, whether it's the physical infrastructure, whether it is the hosting infrastructure, whether it is the power sector, then it impacts the overall framework, the overall internet experience. So in that way, to measurement is very important to understand each and every component is working on the parameters of like uptime, the bandwidth, the DNS latency, and the issues. Like in my example, in some of the experiments that we have done, one of the projects that's in AIORI, which is done by which is the Ministry of Information Technology and Electronics project MITI. So therein we have deployed lots of anchors across India, and one of the examples I'll give over here is root server availability latency. So what happened? We have placed these anchors in different parts of the country, and we are trying to understand the availability of root zone in each and every part of the country, and trying to understand on a day-to-day basis what is happening. So it may become a standardization or become best practices of any class deployment for a reason, which will provide root zone availability for a particular region, and it could be replicated for the CCTLDs, for the authoritative servers, for the recursive servers as well. So in that way, measurements can bring those data points which could actually guide best practices, and they can become standardized. They can help in standardization. So measurement is one of the key aspects over here. The second part of it is understand what could be the best practices and give an holistic approach. That means if we want to do a resiliency, at what level we want to do it, and at the same time, which are those entities which will be into this particular aspects. So these things could be measured. It could be come into best practices, and there is a big scope of a standardization of these implementations of best practices. Like Internet Society has done a project called MIRA, that is measuring internet resiliency in Africa, and they have categorized the internet resiliency parameter of countries and tried to understand internet resiliency, come up with an internet resiliency index which could guide us what is the current scenario of the internet resiliency for a particular region, for a particular place. So in that way, these kind of things are very much if very much in place, and for the next generation of internet and the content and the kind of 5G and other big the kind of bandwidth uses and the content uses is coming up for the next generation internet infrastructure, it will be very essential to come up with an standardized practices of internet resiliency in the country.
Okay, so Anand, that's a very important thought that when you say that standards are required in this field. So, do you think there are not enough standards in this field? So, I'll leave you with this question. I'll come back to you with the same question: that do you think there are less standards on resiliency currently? So, with this, I'll move to Ashish. Ashish is in the middle of standardization, managing Bureau of Indian Standards standardization efforts in ICT sector, and then he's also engaged with ISO and IEC and other standardization platforms. So, Ashish, while we have been talking about resiliency, particularly the previous speakers have talked specifically about internet resiliency. From a standards guy, what do you think is when we talk about resiliency? What comes to your mind? What are the efforts in BIS which is happening on resiliency, and what do you think we should be done?
So thank you, Anupam. Yes, resiliency is a very wide topic and it requires standardization. Resiliency can be in terms of an organization. Can be from in terms of an economic perspective, or it can be in terms of a social perspective also. So it's a very wide topic, and yes, the importance of resiliency we have faced in this COVID challenge. The organization which were resilient enough survived this COVID period, and those organizations which were not resilient enough were washed out in the business environment. Now standardization is also important, that it gives the best practices of doing some things. When an organization is giving a contract to a company on an organization, standards laid down minimum guidelines of providing a good quality product or services. Now we are combining resiliency and standardization in a single as a single entity. So there standard with we have multiple standards on resiliency, whether it's a resiliency of an organization or as a societal resiliency. And yes, the data shows that the organization which have been following these standards are able to get the contracts or the service, able to deliver the services in a best possible way, and they were also able to survive the changes in business, changes in the environment, also in the business continual improvement environment also. Now comes the uh, second challenge. What how sorry I'm sorry how does this, why people are not aware of standards? See, there are standards in the resiliency and people have been following it. And moreover, the business management system standards, whether you talk about 9001 or 14001, they all standards have been revised to incorporate this resiliency part only. For example, the recently the 9001, which is a very widely popular standard, is been revised, and the risk assessment and risk management part has been incorporated in the standard. So the purpose was only to incorporate resiliency in terms for a particular organization, so that the organizations which are being following this the new version of this 9001 or 27001 will be a more resilient one. This in also you talk about various IT companies follows ISO 27001 for IT security and 20,000 for IT service management, for providing delivering services. So these standards are also been revised to incorporate this risk assessment and risk management part, which will provide controls that yes, whenever you have a cyber attack or cyber phishing, how your organization should respond. So there is a system available with you to deal with such situations. Now, and there have been some limited study to show the efficacy of implementing these standards in the recent challenges. However, this study needs to be incorporated on a much wider scale. There are gaps available in the standardization. There are certain areas where standards are not available, as you can say that providing the internet services. Now the resiliency on this providing internet services, there are no standards available, which we need to think upon how what kind of standards we can come upon. In addition, we are recently working on providing the standards in the field of systems resilience, whether the system available, because now the any kind of service is not provided by a single organization. There is a system established, and there are various organizations cooperating in various levels. So we need to have a systems standards which shows that the systems established, but it should be resilient enough to have this to so that they can provide the services in any of the business changes environment. So yes, we need to think upon first. So there are two immediate needs. One is to see the efficacy of the available standards, whether the organizations which have been adopting these standards are the standards helping them to provide the services in the manner which they have been provided earlier. And the second thing is, okay, what are the gaps available in the resilience standards? Few we have identified, like systems resilience, societal resilience, on which we are working upon, but there are certain gaps which will come upon, and we need to identify such areas, and we need to close those gaps, and simultaneously to carry out the study whether the standards available are helping or not helping.
Okay.
That we need to think upon.
So, thanks, Ashish. You brought a very important point that organizational resilience, the organizations which are part of the ecosystem, they also need to be resilient before we start talking about the services resiliency, which is like providing of internet or providing of critical internet infrastructure or otherwise. So, but I'll come back to you with the question on 22316 ISO standard, which talks about organizational resiliency, and if you can give one or two pointers at that time. It will be good for our viewers to know that. So while you think about it, I'll move on to Harish. Harish, you have wore many hats. You were a consultant earlier. Now you are a research scholar working with NFSU, uh, and now so you have now looking at things from an academic standpoint. Okay. So my question is very direct. Do we teach resiliency in our subjects? Uh, is this something which we have thought about it only at some level? Are we training our future generation on resiliency? If not, what are the actions which needs to be taken? Is there enough research which is happening on resiliency? Uh, if not, what can be the possible areas? So, whatever is your thought, please share.
Thanks a lot, Anupam. And first of all, I will
congratulate India Internet Governance Forum and all the panelists, for providing me this platform. Now to answer this question. So before my fellow panelists from BIS, Amitabh sir, uh, Anand, they have actually discussed about what is cyber resiliency, why it is required, and Ashish, specifically told us the gaps and areas. So there, where I could, I believe that there is a huge role of academics, because who will do the research on the areas to come up with the exact problem statements and solutions? Because at the university level, these projects could be carried out, and that is kind of a mandate for a academic institution. So in terms of that, are we teaching the cyber resiliency? So one answer is one direct answer is there is no specific subject which is known as a cyber resiliency. But yes, there are when we talk about high availability of infrastructure or getting in terms of file UTM or the router. So in an indirect manner, we are teaching, but I will prefer to talk about cyber resiliency in the context of the cyber security, because recent attack in which happened, and it is known to everybody now. One of the biggest medical institution in India is affected, and this is the first time that the people who are working in that space are penalized in some or another manner. So that is now we could understand that there were so many news and so many attacks earlier.
Harish, sorry
Yeah.
to disturb your flow, but your voice is a little unstable, so you may want to switch off your video to get some more bandwidth.
Okay. Is it fine now?
Better.
Yeah, much better.
Okay.
Yeah.
So basically, I will talk about cyber resiliency in the context of cyber security, because National Forensic Science University is working in the same area, and we are doing the research. So we have seen that there is a cyber attack on one of the biggest medical institution of India, and there is so many news. It is we all know the details. But now the question is that why it is happened? Are we following the standards there? And what were the gaps in terms of implementing of the security standards? And if there are gaps, what are the things should be done? So there should be a clear-cut procedure, and there should also be the forensic standards should be implemented in that area. So where I believe these things now are prominent, I'll tell you that there are so many attacks across the globe on the medical institutions. If you go through the in the last 1 year, what happened? It was eminent that the malicious preparators are going to attack the medical institutions. So are we following these patterns, or coming up with some kind of cyber resilience in terms of the cyber security, because both the things are kind of inseparable.
Okay. Thanks, Harish. So I'll stop you here. Harish, I'll stop you here. You have raised two very important points, that there has to be some kind of forensic standards on resilience as well, to understand that if things have gone wrong, what are the places where it has gone wrong, to understand. So thanks for pointing it out. I'll come back to you again with the question that what will be your idea in terms of engaging more academic community on this subject. So while you think upon it, I'll come back to Amitabh once again. The question which I left you with was, is the resiliency a defensive action?
Okay, so this is more of an academic question rather than a technical one, so which is good. And I think it's a very, very basic, fundamental, uh, you know, thinking for a system that needs to be designed in a way that resiliency becomes an inbuilt part of the organizational system and the IT systems. Right. So I think previous speakers have talked about organizational resiliency and societal resiliency and economic resiliency and everything else. I think when it comes to internet economy or the digital economy that we all referred to earlier, it is all the different elements that have to come together. Okay, so resilience, I mean, if you go by the Oxford dictionary, meaning of resiliency, it basically says that the meaning is the capacity is to recover quickly from difficulties. So by definition, it says, it looks like a defensive action. Okay, but at the same time, having said that, going purely by the Oxford Dictionary may not be sufficient. I think it is an essential requirement now. It is not an option for any business organization. And all these network elements that I talked about earlier, which comprise the different ecosystems of the internet, they are run by different organizations, individuals even, right? Now, they all need to actually think proactively. They need to analyze, they need to test, they need to identify, and they need to try and close the gaps in terms of wherever there are gaps and vulnerabilities that they can find in the network elements that they govern or they manage. Right. And I think for that, there are different, I don't know if they're sufficient or not from a technical perspective, but there are different standards. NIST has its own standards. Internet Society propagates a whole lot of different other standards. Okay, there are various standards and protocols from IETF that have emerged over the years. I think when we discuss in our community, we realize that there are organizations which are lacking in actual proactive thinking and the strategies, in terms of how to deploy these standards and protocols. And what are their working relationship with other organizations? I think interoperability of different organizations which are managing these elements is also very critical, because they're all technical organizations. Now, how much do they talk to each other? How much do they collaborate with each other? How much have their systems been in sync with each other? Technically, in terms of adopting those standards and ensuring, for example, the Anand and you would understand when you run internet exchanges, and we have done it, when it talks about BGP routing and all that kind of thing, that there is still find some kind of gaps within different service providers, right? In terms of the routing protocols and so I think from a system design perspective, it is very important that these organizations have a proactive, centralized, strategic plan. They need to anticipate what kind of network traffic flows they are going to generate. Everyone knows that yes, internet has grown so quickly and so fast, and it's become so vast. So maybe it may not have been anticipated, but then given the last 10, 15 years of broadband growth, it's pretty fairly easy to understand that the growth is going to remain explosive. Now, if the growth is going to remain explosive, are we really prepared? So, for example, a great job was done by the mobile operators in India when COVID hit. The sudden demand for bandwidth increased when work from home started to happen. Now, how did they cope up? They coped up with a reactive strategy, but then they took into account, the previous the experience of what was happening. They had the data points that they probably collected from their systems and networks as to where the system was generating more data instead of the traditional office complexes. The network data was being amplified from homes, for example. Now they quickly decided to shift the network traffic from various elements in a way that they could manage the traffic much more better than it was expected. Right? Internet didn't fall apart in India. People were able to continue to, and they actually did things like traffic management. For example, they downgraded the video systems, right? So data could flow much more seamlessly. So these are the kind of, a mix of, I would say, a central strategy. It has to become a central part of the management strategy. I think normally what, in my experience in the previously has been in organizations that IT managers actually find it very difficult to get the mind share from the top management on building and getting sufficient budgets or getting their fair share of hearing on what is a real proactive plan for IT resiliency, right? So
Okay.
it's often a difficult task. So I think organizations need to change their strategy and make IT resiliency planning a central part of their strategic plans.
Okay.
Okay, so that's the kind of thinking that we need to go through. So it has to be both a mix of reactive. Obviously, you have to react. For example, in AIMS, the case that I briefly talked about earlier and then highlighted by Harish also, it has probably taught a few lessons. You know, such huge organizations run by government agencies, they were found wanting in terms of being able to immediately react to a hit like a big ransomware hit that they had recently, or the denial of service or whatever happened. Okay, but have they been able to recover quickly enough? It took a long time. It put into jeopardy a whole lot of data of patients, which was very sensitive data, right? So services it's taken a few days to come online. So has it been a good learning for organizations
Yes.
from that?
Possibly, yeah.
Yes. So that's something that needs to be taken into account. So mix of both proactive and reactive.
Okay.
It can't
Okay.
be
Great.
one or the other.
Great point. So I think my intent was to break that myth itself that resiliency is a defensive action, because it cannot be just a defensive action, possibly because the organization may not recover in today's scenario. So whenever this Oxford Dictionary definition was written, it was must be some 100 years old, where it was possible to come back, but in today's scenario possibly the organizations will never come back, so it has to be both proactive and reactive.
Or the
uh,
damage will be
th-
so huge by the time they come back that it'll
hmm,
be difficult to have a good economic recovery immediately.
absolutely, absolutely. So, Anand, taking cue from this and the thoughts which you were having, where you emphasize that metrics and measurements are very key important things. What do you suggest in terms of the gaps which are there currently, and what standards would you want the community to work upon?
Yeah, sure, Anupam. So, as the panel is discussing more or less on the same aspects of it, and as Ashish has mentioned that there are lots of uh, standards on resiliency for different aspects of it. Whenever we see internet from an holistic point of view, we see very less resiliency standards over here. There are some best practices that are coming in. There are some new best practices that has been jumped in by ICANN, ISOC, and other organizations because they have seen that in the light of new developments of internet, this will be something which will be needed in the future. Internet is kind of evolved as a resiliency practices by design. So definitely there are lots of components over here, standards which gives resiliency to internet. But whenever we think of resiliency from a country perspective, for a region's perspective, for a different perspective, then we see there is very less standards over here. And we need to work upon those things. If we want to contribute towards working on an internet resiliency country index kind of thing, and we need to work with all the stakeholders, all the entities, and what kind of standards they bring and they put into so that the internet become resilient, then it is something that we should work upon in the future. I'll just give an example that in one of the RSEC documents, it says that with 13 root servers, 13 root servers across the world deployed in Unicast instances, one region having 8 root servers can bring resiliency in that particular region. So it's an Unicast deployment. But again, it is kind of a theoretical aspect of it. The discussion, even you were there in the call, so discussion was kind of we need to see that whether this is something which need to be taken care of. So like ARI project is trying to get data of 6 months to 1 year down the line and come up with some plans of is there a root zone resiliency can bring if there is 8 root server visibility in that region or not. So this is one specific point that I am putting forward. In that way, there are lots of points that can make this particular resiliency aspect and can make it a standard. And then it could be followed by different organizations who are providing internet services in terms of DNS providers, in terms of ISPs, the IRRs, and then those standards which are evolving right now, like RPKI for BGP, like MANRS for IXPs, content providers, they can participate in these standards. So this can become a holistic standard. And the measurement could actually real time measure whether that entity is actually implementing that or not. That will help understand what is the current uh, status of implementation of those standards practices.
Hmm.
In that way, if anything happens at a particular point of time, so critical information infrastructure for the country and other aspects, we know real time that yes, something of it is there. So it will help at least a resilient infrastructure to sustain that particular event.
Fantastic. So what essentially you have said is that there are less standards. Particularly, you are emphasizing on the operational standards
Yes.
for internet, and then very briefly you touched upon that there has to be a continuous compliance. Okay, so that we know that when things are not working in the operations. So fantastic point, Anand. Thank you, Ashish. Uh, you steered the conversation in a fantastic way earlier, where you talked about the societal resilience, the organizational resilience. So the and Amitabh talked briefly about that resilience has to be part of the central. It has to be the central part of the management strategy. So, is there any standard which do exist, which organizations can refer to when they are working on this dimension, or they will have to start afresh? Does 22316 ISO 22316 helps here? What is your view?
Thank you, Anupam. So, 22316 talks about organization resilience, whether an organization can adapt or to the changing adopt and adapt to the changing environment, how well they can respond to the whether any problem occurs or whether they have mechanisms to deal with such situations or not. So it has evolved from the existing ISO to 9001 standard 2015, which talks about risk assessment and risk management. So now, where if an organization adopt this standard, it should have a mechanism to deal with the risks, how to identify such risk, and how to change their current business best practices as per the identified risk. Such things helps us in identify in making their organization resilience, whether it is a cyber attack or any kind of activities possible. So we can in as per this standard, we cannot always identify all the risks at present point of time, but we should have a mechanism to identify such risk. There should be a continuous dialogue by the upper management with the lower management. And let's say an organization say, let's say you have a bandwidth of 10x capacity. Now we want to evolve. Now there is a certain demand from 1000x demand. Then how do you deal with in such situations? So this organization talks about you should have a mechanism to think in this direction. And if such situations arise, how do you come up with the solutions in this part? Now this organization is this is a certain kind of a guidance kind of document, but I feel this should be an auditable standard. For example, let's say an organization, while getting a contract or while delivering a public service, says that I adhere to this standard. Now a third organization like BIS or any TUV or UL can be capable enough that they can audit a particular organization based on this standard. Yes, whatever you are saying, you are having such mechanism, you are right, and it can be audited by a third party. So this third party audit will make checks and balance and will certify that this organizations whatever the resilience part, the organization's resilience mechanism they are adopting, they are saying is right, and it can be verified. So it gives a credibility to the organization, and as well as it gives a reputation that yes, it has been certified. Similarly, gets popular. The standards get popularized, and it gives mechanism to other organization to not only to deliver services but to certify the resilience part also.
Thank you, Ashish. So wonderful points that what Amitabh said, that there has resiliency should be part of this central part of the management. You are saying that there exists a standard which is currently a guidance document, but possibly an auditable version of it will allow to see that whether or not mechanisms are in place. So thank you for that input, Harish. Mm, so what role do you see for the academic community here? Initially, you said that we are not teaching resiliency. Now, what role do you see for the academic community in ensuring that resilience becomes a subject of continuous discussion and adoption?
So basically, first pointer is for the research and the development part, where
Mhm.
academia could play a huge role.
Mhm.
So, in short, the cyber resiliency, you already know that we have a we have done the MOU with Internet iPhone, India Internet Foundation, to go into that direction, so that we could actually not just teach theoretically, but we could also teach practically. So, in that sense, we are doing for last 1 year. In addition to that, during our research work, uh, is there any country who is actually working on that area? So I have found that UAE is working on not on the just smart cities, but they are working like a smart nation, ensuring the cyber resiliency, where the key stakeholders, government, academic, industry, and society are the part of it. And during this discussion, we all are here, and uh, I suggest that BIS should come forward to support us, and the NIXI, it has a huge role. So as a MNRS fellow, so I'm currently serving the role of MNRS. I would request NIXI to bring all those ISPs together, because they all are connected to NIXI. They should do activities, and we should ensure the MNRS compliance, and that kind of activities are also important. So in a because this internet world is decentralized, all the stakeholders are always needed. So as a NFSU, we are there to support in any way. And one of the most important thing, we not just to think that we are just work in a preventive manner. So recently NFSU
Yeah, see,
got
yeah, Harish, I'll stop you here.
okay.
So I have taken your point. You have made a beautiful point. Instead of smart city, possibly we should think of smart nation. And then there are operational standards like Mandas and all, which should be implemented by the respective organizations who are dealing with the different stakeholders. So I'll stop you here, and because of the paucity of the time, but we do have a question in the chat that should we keep sustainability also should we not keep sustainability also a key aspect of resiliency? So a quick 30-second, uh, Amitabh, your point of view. Should sustainability a part of resiliency?
I think a great question, and thank you, Anupam. Very quickly, I will respond very shortly. I think when I spoke about the organizational need to have a central strategy for building resiliency, I was also referring to the fact that it is not an option; it is a requirement for any business organization. And most of the organizations which are also considered to be very technical organizations, but they are business organizations at the end of it. Big tech companies, ISPs, anyone who's involved in the managing of the network elements, right? Now, for
Right.
their sustainability, it is really, really vital to have IT resiliency systems in place, because their business continuity and sustainability depends on it.
Mhm.
And as we discussed earlier, for example, look at, and I'm repeating that, AIMS, if I see it as a service, okay, as essential public service, it got severely disrupted because it was
Mhm.
caught off guard, and it probably so its sustainability came into question, right? So I think that's what we need to look at. The answers are built into our responses earlier. Sustainability definitely
Is a part of
is
resilience.
part, and it's the reason why we are talking about resiliency.
Okay, great, great, fantastic. Thank you, Amitabh. So we are just 1 minute left from the time allotted to us. So I'll quickly summarize what we have learned, what we have discussed today. So what we discussed and came to understand was that resiliency should be not only seen from the technical perspective; it has to be from the organizational perspective. Mm. It should be the central part of the management strategy for an organization. There is an guidance standard, management standard, ISO 22316, but it is not an auditable standard. So possibly that is an area which we should look into to make it as a requirement standard, which every organization has to mandatorily get audited. Then from the operational standards, we clearly find that initiatives like Mandras and others are there but there are quite few of them. So there is a huge gap in terms of operational standards if we look at internet resiliency in particular, and there's a huge opportunity to work in this particular area. And in terms of research and development, the academic community is interested to take this initiative forward. We have not included it as part of our curriculum, but possibly that is an area where we should include this subject as part of our curriculum now to push it hard. And overall, if we don't do resiliency, possibly will not sustain ourselves. So, sustainability is the bigger wrapper around this debate on resiliency. So, with this, I thank India Internet Governance Forum to give this topic, accepting this topic, and have a workshop on this one. I thank Amitabh for coming in on a Saturday evening. Thank you so much for being here. Anand, thanks for bringing in your operational perspective. It was really insightful. Ashish, your BIS background and the understanding of the standards has always been a leading light. So thank you for bringing it in. And Harish, your community perspective and the academic perspective is helping us a lot. So thank you for being in this panel and talking with me. It is a beautiful evening outside. So let's hit somewhere. Thank you. And
Thank
enjoy
you.
the rest of the evening, whatever is left of it. I am surely
Sure,
going to
Anupam.
do
Thank
that.
you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you,
Uh,
Anupam.
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Thanks.
Thank
Thanks
you,
a
Bye
lot.
bye.
Anupam, sir. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye.